Elevate TV, advancing kingdom lifestyle.
A well-socialized individual is one who can talk to people from all walks of life. I've seen a lot have started businesses very early. By 16, some of them have run companies. They call themselves CEOs or CFOs or CTOs.
Yes.
And then they get into their business space and later on they now go to find courses that help them become better. A typical school day for a child, maybe 10 and below, covering reading, writing, and arithmetic would take you maybe 1 to 2 hours of actual academic learning.
Yes.
That frees up the rest of the day to interest, whether it's art, science, sports, field trips, and also the extracurricular activities we do.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Gigi Report. I'm your host, Godfrey Gichuki, and this is an exciting conversation once again. Today we have an amazing guest on the set, and I'm sure you're going to like this conversation. Welcome, Melissa Wakhu, to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to have you here.
I'm glad to be here.
As you know, Gigi Report, we bring you amazing guests, amazing conversations. Today we're going to be talking about homeschooling the African child. And we want to lay the ground for that and then dive into the conversation. Now, education in African countries is largely state-run, as you all know, and there is a significant input by private sector operators. There are many private schools, but largely most of it is state-run, you know, primary schools, high schools, universities. The idea of homeschooling itself sounds like it's really outside. So the question is, what's the case for homeschooling your children? Must you do it? And why should that happen? And that's one of the questions we're going to be addressing. How do you create homeschooling resources, for example? Some of you have just been hearing people homeschool their children, and today you're going to get a lot of answers to that. And then, of course, what are the challenges of successfully homeschooling your kids? Maybe you are so scared. I mean, I really would love to homeschool my children, but I don't know what to do. So my guest here today is going to be helping us go through all that and answer some of those questions. Let me give you a brief introduction, and then we get the conversation underway. My guest is Melissa Wakhu. She is a homes educationist, and she is also the East African regional representative of Classical Conversation, and this is a homeschooling resource provider founded in the US. They provide materials, curriculum for homeschooling, and so she's the regional representative. Melissa is an author and content creator and the co-founder of Soul Kids Africa, which is a business that provides Kenyan storytellers, a platform for Kenyan storytellers, authors, and artists. They create content, they make books for children, and all of them with some very interesting African themes. So we're going to be hearing more about that. And they do that through arts, music, and conversation, and dance. So wonderful. Let's dive into this conversation. And as always, the Gigi Report is a platform for big, bold, honest conversation on a broad range of subjects: social, cultural, economic, political, if you want, theological, and philosophical, and science, if you wish. And so today we're having, a conversation on matters, social, culture, and, the economics, education in particular. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy this conversation. So let's get the conversation underway. Remember to share the links with your friends, invite your friends. Remember to subscribe, Elevate TV Kenya, Facebook page, YouTube channel, and activate the bell so that every time we go live, you get notified. All right. So let's get the conversation going, Melissa.
Yes.
Let's begin. I always like beginning from, asking my guests to tell us about your career and how you go to where you are today.
I studied computer science, interestingly.
Yes.
I was always an academically smart student.
Okay.
So in primary school, I got good grades. I went to one of the top high schools, Precious Blood, Riruta.
Okay.
And then I went to University of Nairobi and I studied computer science. And I graduated with a first class honors.
Wow.
So I was on a great track professionally.
Right.
And my first employer was Deloitte, which is one of the big 4 audit firms globally. And it was such a great landing spot.
Okay.
In terms of what I could do professionally.
Yes.
So I worked as an internal auditor, an IT consultant. I used to do corporate governance. Some of my clients were Kenya Airways or Safaricom, Diageo, big names. And I had this huge grand plans of where I was headed.
Right.
God had bigger plans. That's the best way to say it. And his plans are always amazing.
Right.
When I look back
Yes.
at the moments of interruption. So simultaneously, I've always loved children since I was young. I'm a last born.
Yes.
From a family of 3.
Yeah.
And I always wanted younger siblings.
Yes.
And so in the neighborhood, I was a child, everyone used to come, the younger kids used to come looking for so that I can play with them. When I was 16, I started teaching Sunday school at Nairobi Baptist Church.
Okay.
And I was teaching 12-year-olds.
Okay.
So you can imagine now the 4-year age gap when I meet them now and they see me, they're like, Teacher Melissa. And their parents, they're working people.
Yes.
So I used to teach kids choir, kids camps, and my love for kids has always been consistent.
Okay.
And the thing I noticed as I used to teach Sunday school and run the kids camp every holiday was children who had present parents. There was something secure, confident, and sure about them. They were not perfect. They were cheeky like any other child.
Yeah.
But they were well-grounded. That's a word I could say.
Yes.
And I knew this because their parents would drop them and stay on, linger, or come early to pick and stay on. These parents inadvertently sort of mentored me as I watched how they parented.
Yes.
Because we were the youth, if we needed a lift home, I'd be thrown into their car and I'd listen to how they have conversations and friendships with their children.
Okay.
So I knew I want many children. In fact, I used to tell my mom I'll have 10 big children and 2 little ones.
Right.
And she'd ask me, what happens when the 2 little ones grow? And I said, I'll just have 2 more little ones. Like it was in perpetuity. I was always going to have children.
All right.
And so on this path, I'm building my career professionally. But I also know I want to be a present parent.
Okay.
And at the point when I was now dating my husband and we're planning about family and the children we'll have, I began to meet an interesting crop of people, and this was a category called stay-home moms.
Okay.
And they were peculiar to me because, remember, I'm this go-getter, professional. I've got great things I'm going to accomplish.
Yes.
But these are people who chose to be home, not because they're dumb or because they're failures, but because they felt it's a priority to be present at home. And when I'd visit their homes, there was something homely about their homes, where you just want to put your feet up, sit, have a cup of tea. You feel home. That's a word I'd say. The chair is well worn. It's not new and perfect and pristine, but it feels like life happens there.
I like that. I did like, the way you're describing. You're a good storyteller. And those of you that are following this conversation, we're going to be coming back to that.
Yes.
So the chairs are well worn and, there's life in that home.
Yes.
And it felt like there's somebody running the show here.
Absolutely.
There's life taking place in this home.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And life in its true, authentic, messy form.
Yes.
Then I'd compare that with some of my colleagues who I'd visit in their homes, and their homes were, in this huge palatial neighborhoods.
Yes.
But you almost feel like you have to sit up and sit proper because everything is perfectly placed,
Okay.
There's no room for error.
Right.
And so when we were discussing, when we were dating, we knew we want to be present parents. And in our grand plans that will happen when we're very wealthy, we'll have, 11 cars and chauffeurs and huge homes wherever. And by then it'll make sense that I can step down
Yes.
and be at home.
Yes.
I keep giving that story because I picture God in heaven listening and laughing.
Yes.
Because he's thinking, okay, just go ahead. I have great plans for you.
Yes.
And so in our first year of marriage, I'm pregnant.
Yes.
And my husband reminds me, do you remember we had this conversation about making the decision to be present?
Yes.
A few things encouraged that conversation. Remember, I'm working at an audit firm. It's high pressure, long hours, very demanding environment.
Yes.
And I'm watching all the moms in that space have to justify why they have to go and breastfeed, go and take their children for vaccinations. And their struggle began within me. A calling where I used to ask myself, God, is there more that I'm destined for? All this amazing reviews and reports and all these big corporates that I'm engaging with. Have I changed a life? Is there impact? Is this generational? And that was the stirring of him beginning to open my eyes that there's more that I could be and do. And the challenging part or the step of faith at that point was I was earning more than my husband at that particular moment. And my employer had a better insurance cover. But, when God pokes at you, you try and ignore it, you try and act like Jonah, get on a boat, and all these things I was trying to ignore, this calling. But the more we prayed about it, the more our conviction was clear that if he has called me to be home, he will provide. And so I made that step of faith. There's a book I read that says, if you want to walk on water, get out of the boat.
Wow. Amazing. I think that's a story that you're very passionate about. And
Yes.
I wish we had all the time to
Absolutely.
hear, your journeys and personal transformation coming from, high corporate, game, where, when you work as an auditor, and an expert really in these high-end corporations, where you do 16 hours and you're competing with men, very aggressive men, and you're in that space. And here you are, you're so passionate about the fact that you want to have your babies, you want to raise a family, and you want to have a real home.
Yes.
I think that is a major dilemma, and we can come back to that. So basically by observation, that's how you began to draw your inspiration.
Yes.
How did you then, kind of home down the idea that you needed to homeschool your children?
Okay.
Did you find other people who are homeschooling children? And did they inspire you? So, and again, I know it's brief because we have so many other things I want us to talk about. Yes. But yes.
So, let me connect the dots quickly. So now I'm home, having children. I have 4 children now.
Wow.
A boy and 3 girls.
Yes.
And because I'm home, remember, I'm also aware that I'm gifted, in terms of I love learning. And
Yes.
Academically, I consider myself intellectually gifted.
Yes.
And so now we start looking for schools. And all these schools, are great schools, but they tell you in this school, they can count. In class 1, they can count, they can write, all these goals that they use to assess and demonstrate excellence in school.
Yes.
However, I'm passionate that childhood should be about playing.
Yes.
I remember being picked up and you're covered in soil from head to toe. You can't
Yes.
see the child. That is evidence of fun
Yes.
and learning.
Yes.
And then I'd ask, so I'm sending my 3-year-old to school to do what? And they'd say, we'll teach them how to tie their shoelace, how to color. And at that point I thought, okay, that I can do that at home.
Yes.
That's easy.
Yes.
And so let me that was my son. Let me keep him home until he's 6.
Yes.
And then we go to standard 1.
Yes.
And in that space, then I was using what is called interest-based learning.
Yes.
So he'd ask me, we see on TV maybe a spaceship, he'd ask. We go to the library, I pick an encyclopedia, or we go on YouTube. And I noticed he was absorbing many things.
Yes.
And so by default, because I'm talking to him as I would any other person, and we're learning together, it doesn't mean I'm an expert.
Yes.
We learned about space travel, And then, of course, that leads to conversations about the sun and planets.
Yes.
And by doing that, turns out he's learning shapes. So I was not telling him this is a circle,
Yes.
color the circle.
Yes.
I was using his interest, and by default, the things that a 4 or 5-year-old would know, he was picking because of the kind of things we were learning. And then in that space, I stumbled upon a community of homeschoolers and discovered that there's actually a thing called home education. And the difference between home education and I'd say homeschool, just to clarify, is sometimes homeschool is bringing school home.
Yes.
Education is bigger.
Yes.
Education speaks to academics, intellectual, also speaks to character, also speaks to talent. So you're nurturing the entire spirit, soul, and body.
All right.
And every parent does that. You send your child to school, that's fine, but you're the one who teach your child their first words. You know, say ma, ba, ba. You're the one who teach your child potty training, personal hygiene, brushing the teeth, personal responsibility. And so education transcends academic learning.
Okay.
And
and that's an important distinction, that education is much more broader than schooling.
yes.
So schooling is really structured. It is, you design the content and all that, and then you deliver it to kids.
Yeah.
But the education is much, much broader.
Yes.
You're describing all the other little things that mom have to do anyway
Yes.
for their children.
Yes.
They don't even get credit for it. You know?
Yes.
Yes.
And yet they're educating. But fathers too, because I find the beautiful balance is the things about character that children pick from their dads. There's a voice or a calling or purpose in this place of a dad in terms of love. In our case, because I was the one at home, my husband would model for them career.
Yes.
And going to work.
Yes.
He was more passionate about them learning Kiswahili than I was, so he took up Kiswahili as a subject.
Okay.
That he'd teach them, and his style of teaching is very different from mine.
Yes.
And the big question I get is, find their home, am I a trained teacher? I don't think you need to be a trained teacher to educate your child.
Okay.
All you need is a commitment. And if you look at the journey of life, a parent is the only one who's committed in the long run.
Okay.
To ensure that your child is successful. A teacher in a school will focus on the subjects or the year that they have the student. Their goal is to make sure the child does the best in that particular subject in that grade. But you as a parent, you are the one who has to think, after this grade, what next?
Yes.
What do we study in university? How do I mentor my child in terms of career choices? And so in home education, it's pretty much the same. Where taking a step back to study my children. Because I have 4, they're all so different. And so there's no one solution.
Right.
One approach.
Okay.
There's one who needs movement to learn. So I make sure, she takes a break and does her somersaults. Or when I'm reading to her, she will not sit still, but she's listening.
Yes.
Such a child in a school environment would suffer because I'd be told maybe she has ADD or the ADHD because she can't stay still.
Yeah.
My son likes to do what he calls thinking breaks, where when it's too much, he wants to go outside and just pace back and forth. And that's clearing his head so that he comes back.
My goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you that are following this conversation, I'm speaking to a homeschooling mom. I hope you're picking up the ideas. She has a son who then claims he wants a thinking break. He goes out, paces up and down, then says to the mom, my head is now clear, mom. What else do you want me to learn? Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing experience.
Yeah.
And here you're watching your son, kind of picking up very powerful life skills, because it means if you fast forward 30 years later when this guy is head of a corporation, he will need that kind of skill. My head is clogged up. I need some clarity. I take a walk or something like that, then I can be a real human being. I can engage properly. Amazing. I think we picked up that, so you got into this homeschooling, you're homeschooling your children. Actually, by the way, for those of you who are following, Melissa's daughter is actually here. She's in the background. So we didn't put her on the set, but she's following this conversation. She's actually here to learn how what we are doing here, how we are recording this show, and she's taking pictures. She's actually in class, so learning media. And you know, her mom just insists, whatever you can learn, you have to learn it, and you come with me, and every moment is a learning moment. So that's very powerful skills. I know there's so much we can talk about. So you started homeschooling.
Yes.
And then tell us a little bit about, you stumbled in this group of homeschooling moms.
Yes.
They opened that space up. What's the state of homeschooling in this country? That's the question I want to ask. I know whatever information you have, and there are people who really want to hear. Is this just something for a few, former, high-flying career women who probably made their money? You know, some people may actually say, Melissa has made her money. That's why you can afford to tell us all those stories. So yeah, I think you need to bring that up.
Okay.
And also tell us, yes, there are many people who are homeschooling. Homeschooling is for everyone,
yes.
Whatever your economic status. I think that needs to be said.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question.
Yeah.
And also, thank you for even connecting that every moment is a learning moment. And that really is the why of homeschool. It's not even about opportunities or resources. It's more of, what is it that you envision when you imagine your child is standing independently away from you?
Yes.
Who does that look like? And whenever I talk with several parents, when they want to know about homeschool, they'll always define a critical thinker, a problem solver, a kind person, enterprising, aware of their talents. For a lot, it's know God, have a right foundation in His Word and how they can be used by Him in the world to make a difference, have a sense of purpose and mission. If they're gifted in sports, they are exposed to that. And the truth is, there's no one school or one curriculum that will give you that. And so stepping back to answer the why will give us a solution that every child can be homeschooled.
Okay.
Not every home or family can homeschool because of different circumstances, either health or, single parents, although we do have some single parents who homeschool. But then once we understand the why and we take time to study the child, understand each child, what's their learning style, what's their interest. God creates geniuses. He's never created a fool or a dumb person. He's an abundant God, a God of amazing resources. And the challenge is when we try and make a child who's gifted in agriculture to thrive in physics. And then this child walks away thinking they're dumb. But maybe they're destined to be the food agricultural provider, who'll ensure there's food security in nations, the way Joseph did.
Yeah.
And so then the next step will be to find what resources are available. So it's not a question of cost. Homeschool is as affordable as you want it to be. And I always say start from what you know before you move into the unknown.
Right.
And so what we know is, our 844 or CBC resources. How can we teach them differently? How do we study the counties and headquarters? That's one of the things we're doing this semester. And then let's go and explore. Let's go to Kinangop. Let's go to Kisumu. Let's even get on a bus or take the train. And as we're crossing, let's study these people.
Yes.
Where did this tribe and people, where did they come from? And there you've thrown in your history.
Yes.
Then what is their economy? How do fishermen make money? There you've added mathematics, you've added civics, you've added politics. When we're having elections, for example, as a nation, at home we have family elections. So people will have to do posters and campaign to us and tell us why we need to vote for them. We do a secret ballot. And there we're also learning our civic duty.
Wow.
And so education then becomes holistic.
Yes.
And in this space then, one of the great resources that I use, which is classical conversation, is a great tool because I see it as a framework. Think of it as a skeleton that gives you the freedom to flesh it out in a way that makes sense. And so it gives you the pegs of science, of Latin, of math, of history, of literature. And so while we're reading great events globally, I'm reading amazing American literature, but I'm not reading equally amazing African literature.
Right.
And so subliminally, I'm telling my children, maybe for them to succeed, they have to go abroad.
Right.
because we're reading about great inventors, or we're reading about Shakespeare or Einstein, because those are the, fathers of education or philosophers.
Yes.
And so that caused me to begin to ask, what is there on the continent that is truly African, not told to us, but told by us? And I think that's a great differentiator. And that starts with just conversations with the older generation. So again, speaking to how to do it. I find there's a lot of value when my children spend time with my parents, with their grandparents in the village, or even here in Nairobi, wherever, because they get to learn certain things about this name Makutano. Where did it come from?
Right.
And what is the history there? This particular tribe, what were they known for?
Right.
And what did independence look like? What was life before independence? Who are the great African heroes? Not just political heroes, but each tribe had, people they regarded as leaders who led in a particular way, either in battle or in conquering, and understanding what kingdoms were there, because the Bantus, the Nilotes, and the Kushites, we came from somewhere. Where did we come from? So understanding the ancient kingdoms, the Mali kingdoms, the Ghana kingdoms, the Aksum kingdoms, and then bringing this on the same conversation when we're learning about Mongolia in China.
Right.
So we're not learning Africa separately, but we're learning it in context and understanding when were all these things happening, what were the economies and the dynasties that were in Africa. Even in the Bible, where we learn about the Kush and King Solomon meeting Queen Sheba, who was from the Kushite and the Kush Empire. And where is it in modern day Africa, And these are important conversations, because then the difference I saw with my children, but also the children in the community that I lead, is they began to see, oh, you mean being African is great.
Melissa, what you demonstrate, and this is very powerful and very, very valuable for those who are listening, is that you can become a homeschooling mom, and that also calls you out to an adventure to learn as you're also teaching your children. It makes it places a demand on you, and actually you begin to think about learning differently.
Yes.
That if you're going to explain to your children, say, like, teach them basic, like what you describe, elections and civic whatever, where you literally conduct a small election in the house, and know that one of your son wants to be president,
yes,
and then he has to do posters, he has to fundraise. You're actually impacting on them the whole idea that that's how it's done. That's what happens. So then when he grows up and he's picking these ideas, he's absorbing them and really engaging, and comes out as somebody who is actually properly oriented in his head.
Absolutely.
Amazing. So Melissa, we're going to go into a short break.
Okay.
And then when we're going to come back, because we still have more questions to deal with, the whole issue of the resources you need. I know we've touched a little bit of that, and then the whole experience, children, what are children saying? So we'll come back to that. So ladies and gentlemen, let's take a short break. When we come back, I'm going to be asking Melissa more questions, and then she's going to open up for us a little bit more about what sort of resources we need to be able to implement homeschooling and make it fun. Okay, so don't go away. Keep it elevate. We're coming back shortly. Welcome back. This is the Gigi Report. We are talking about homeschooling the African child. And before we went to the break, we were talking about, the whole experience of being a homeschooling mom. and actually the whole idea of homeschooling. And Melissa is here telling us about her experience. You were telling us about, all the way learning kind of it becomes so intuitive for, when you're homeschooling mom. You teach them everything. You teach them history, science, and they learn on the go. You're telling me about how, for example, teaching a basic civic class or lesson on county headquarters, and then you have to drive your kids, or at least to give them a feel, drive them to county headquarters so that they can actually see these are the real county headquarters and this is the governor's office and stuff like that. So kind of like these are your own children, but you're giving them that experience.
Yes.
So I think that's very interesting. But then let's go back to the whole idea of homeschooling itself is not unstructured, obviously.
Yes.
So you need resources. There's a curriculum. Tell us about that. Where do you get the content? Where do you get the curriculum? How do you then grade the kids? Because now you're also the examiner or something like that. I don't know how do you do it. So let's talk about that.
Okay.
And then the resources that are needed. And then we can also talk about your adventure in creating resources.
Thank you for that question. And I think it's important what you have said. I call it lifelong learning. Learning never ends.
Yes.
For me in school, when you're done with that subject, when you finish Form 4, we used to burn the books because we foolishly thought we're done with learning.
It's a great evil.
Yes, completely. But when we're lifelong learners, and we've just talked about how we're always transforming, transitioning, always acquiring new skills. And I think that's a beautiful gift that never ends. And in this journey of lifelong learning as a home educating parent, I am a lead learner. So it doesn't mean I know everything, but I'm leading the learning process. So I'm demonstrating the curiosity. And in terms of resources, I always say it's always more comfortable to start with a known. So the curriculum that we know generally available would be CBC books, or the IGCSE books, or American curriculum, or IB. So depending on the age of the child, a little child, early learning is the same. They're just learning the sounds, the letters, patterns. If you can teach a child how to read, write, and do their math, then they're okay.
Right.
And for that, there's no one resource that's better than the other. The differences between the different resources is what we call the pedagogies, which is the approach to learning.
Okay.
And finding an approach that works for your child.
Okay.
And then once as a home educator, you're familiar with the basic ideas, then you can begin to play around with it. And so we have eclectic homeschoolers, and an eclectic learner just does a mix and match. So you'll find maybe you like the IGCSE approach to math, but you're picking the CBC book for agriculture, then maybe you're picking the IB book for something, then you're adding a coding book, and then you're using a literature book to read and learn about history and civic. So you've developed a bit of more confidence and you're figuring it out. And in terms of assessment and ensuring that the child is learning, then the same way there are different approaches. And there's the typical exam approach where at the end of each term you could administer an exam. I know a lot of home educators have relationship with neighborhood schools where you just go to the school nearby and ask them to help assess your child. There's some great resources like the Accelerated Christian Education that within itself has checks and balances to help you keep track. Or the other route is the one that I have taken, is a community-based learning. So come together with other like-minded, but more importantly, like-hearted parents who share the same value system, the same faith, and we're in agreement in the things that we're teaching our children. And so we meet once a week, and that helps us with accountability to make sure that, the things that we want to learn, we're actually learning them. And then the children come together and then they either present to one another, engage each other in questions. My children get to learn to listen to instructions from another parent who's not me, who teaches differently from me, so they are mentored. And then I get to fellowship with other peer people. And within that, then we assess. And the difference between an exam and an assessment helps the child see what they understood, what they didn't. And so if they didn't, let's go back and understand, because it's a
Yes.
building block.
Yeah.
And so we don't use words like you're repeating the grade.
Mm-hmm.
We're mastering.
Okay.
We're taking time for you to understand these principles in mathematics or in writing or in English or in science before we advance you and you have gaps, because then it will cause problems further down.
Okay.
Then the biggest transition for all of this would be if you're homeschooling your child and you want to transition to a school at any point in the journey, the simplest way is to identify the school and have a conversation with the school and say, I've been homeschooling my child, this is their age, this is what we've been learning. What grade do you think that come in, and what do you require? How will you assess them? And I found that most schools are open to such conversations because schools are in business. They need the school fees. But ultimately, as educators, they would know. And they'd tell you, you know, we maybe need to catch up on this. Maybe your child is ahead on that. Maybe this is the grade we'd place them in.
Yes.
The other biggest transition, which is the one that I am on the journey, is I plan to homeschool my children all the way till they're ready to transition into university.
Okay.
And for that, like with my son who's almost 14, we're working backwards. He's begun to identify certain careers he's curious about. And the beauty of homeschool is then we can do apprenticeships, like what I've done with my daughter today.
Yes.
I've exposed her to different careers, or all my children, they come with me, or they go with their dad to the office, or their auntie, or their uncle, or a friend.
Okay.
And then from these apprenticeships, they get exposed to different careers. And then we work backwards and see which universities offer these programs and what are the entry requirements. And for most of them will be a test, either an KCSE or ACT or GED or IB. And then we prepare for that exam.
GCE.
Yes, is a British curriculum.
That
yes.
is a British curriculum.
Yes.
Of course, KCPE, everyone knows.
Yes.
What is IB?
IB is an International Baccalaureate. I think that's what it means. And it's primarily accepted by universities in the UK and Canada and Australia.
Okay.
But also locally. A lot of private universities understand it, and there are certain schools locally that offer that as a curriculum.
Okay.
And so it's also an exit option for a homeschool child.
Okay. Okay.
And the beauty of looking for an exit strategy is if you start the conversation early, the child can take the test when they're young, fail, see what they need to work on.
Yes.
Prepare again, take it again,
yes.
pass or
yes.
fail.
Yes.
So there's no one way. The other thing I've seen some homeschooled or home educated children do is if they're interested in a certain profession
yes.
or business. I've seen a lot have started businesses very early. By 16, some of them have run companies. They call themselves CEOs or CFOs
yes.
or CTOs.
yes.
And then they get into their business space, and later on they now go to find courses that help them become better business administrators, or better in construction, or better in architecture. A typical school day doesn't take an entire day.
Right. Yes. That's the other bit. I think it's important for those who are following this conversation.
Yes.
They're thinking, I mean, you've kept your kids in the house the whole day, so
yes.
Of what good are they to the society?
Absolutely.
So it's also good to talk about the extracurricular and the other opportunities that are available. Yes.
Absolutely. And are they, well socialized? That's
yes.
the other question most people wonder.
Yes.
And because you take out transport time,
yes.
You take out assembly, and you take out a rule of averages, where in a typical classroom, the teacher has to go at the pace of the average child. And so if the child already got the concept, they have to wait for everyone. Or if they didn't, too bad, they'll have to find remedial
yes.
time to catch up.
Yeah.
So because you take out all of that, a typical school day for a child, maybe 10 and below, covering reading, writing, and arithmetic, would take you maybe 1 to 2 hours of actual academic learning.
Yes.
That frees up the rest of the day to interests, whether it's art, science, sports, field trips, and also the extracurricular activities we do. So we get together with other home educators and we do field trips. We've gone to House of Manji to see how they make biscuits. We've gone to the United Nations to see how they meet. We've gone to Standard Media, Nation Media. We've visited farms to see how greenhouses operate. We've visited Mobius to see how they make cars.
Yes.
And I found most of these profession organizations are very open to home educators or just parents and children who have questions.
Yes.
For me, a simple visit to the post office to post a letter, I'll tell the person at the post office or at the bank, I tell the teller, I'm with my child, they have questions. Or even if we're going to the veterinary to take a sick dog or cat,
Yes.
then we all come with all these questions and you find someone is so eager to explain,
Yes.
this is what we do, these are the processes. And a well-socialized individual is one who can talk to people from all walks of life.
Absolutely.
So from their peers and fellow adults. And I think that's...
that needs to be said. That needs to be said, Melissa.
Yes.
And a well
socialized
person
Yes.
is someone who can talk to other people,
Yes.
including strangers, and express themselves.
Absolutely.
And can ask questions.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the greatest benefit of homeschooling. I have met homeschooled kids, and they are amazing. You know, a 10-year-old homeschooled kid who can actually engage in a very adult conversation, or rather, they are not afraid. They don't have this mask of they are frightened by adults. And I hope that that's not what you teachers in high school and primary school, with your mindset of, these learners are foolish. You just intimidate these kids, and then you kind of like make them so afraid of adults. And I think that's a big failure on the side of, state-run education, private education, and, those kind of education. Yes.
Yes, where it's a fear-based rather than encouraging curiosity. You can ask questions, but you should do it respectfully. And I think that's the opportunity to train the character. You can disagree with me as your parent, but you must do it respectfully.
Yes.
After you have heard me.
Yes.
And sometimes after you've obeyed me, whether you agree or not, you obey, and then you circle back and say, do you know when this happened, this was a situation? Then we can dialogue.
Okay.
But then these are all skills that you're right, we were not taught. I grew up knowing or studying people and trying to figure out what answer do they want.
Yes.
And so I know if I'm talking to Gigi, this is how I will answer. It doesn't mean it's a reflection of who I am.
Yes.
Because there's no freedom to discover yourself. The goal is just to pass or to get favor, whether it's with the teacher, the boss. And so when you're suddenly thrown in a situation where you're the decision maker, you don't have the skills or you don't even know yourself in order to make that decision.
You really exposed and given us the very insight view of homeschooling. Very amazing experience, and of course the mixing and matching of curriculum and the assessment. And I'm kind of summarizing that it's not just the examination; it's an assessment, especially for the early, the younger children.
Yes.
And then the whole idea is that you want to encourage the children to decide which way they want to go, look at what is available in the market, the exams they can do.
Yes.
So if homeschooled kids want to go with the mainline state-run education, so they can prepare for KCSE,
yes,
and then they will just do like everybody else.
Yes.
And they just be fine like everyone else.
Absolutely.
Whether it's the British curriculum or any other curriculum that then leads them to the career of their choice.
Yes.
Amazing. So let's talk about content creation. We said early that you're the co-founder and author. Let's talk about this. The books you've written and the So Kids Africa program and business. Let's talk about that. And our listeners, Melissa brought me a little gift, nice little tiny winnie gift. This is mine, key holder, with an African man. So let's talk about that. Tell us about what materials you're producing and the So Kid Africa program. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that question, and I'm glad you like the key holder.
Yes, thank you very much indeed.
Yes, you're most welcome. While educating my children, I started to see the gap of good quality, global standard materials that are written by Africans, for Africans, about Africans to Africans.
Right.
The ones that are there, I'm not saying they're not, are written for the sake of academic learning.
Okay.
And so they're grade-based. So
Yes.
you'll find we now have a good collection of, Kenyan and African stories and literature, but they, because they're being produced for affordability to meet the academic goals of the ministry, then you'll find simple things like the style of art, the amount of color, the quality of paper has to be, scale mass-produced. This I'm comparing with the wonderful resources I'm using to teach my children, of which none are African.
Right.
And then the disconnects happened for me, and I thought, how hard? That's how it started.
Yeah.
How hard can it be to write a story? I discovered it's actually hard, but it's not too hard, because in our African context, we're all storytellers.
Yes.
This whole session is about stories. All the Gigi reports, you're collecting stories from individuals.
Yes.
And so how can I put these stories in a form that connect and resonate with an audience that's African, but that inspires them? So that then we're dealing with identity crisis. We're not having people who are dark wishing they were lighter and bleaching themselves.
Yes.
We're dealing with even things like the hair crisis, where I imagine if, I can have long wispy hair because I'm reading books like Rapunzel.
Yes.
And the girl had, long wispy hair that could reach the bottom.
Yes.
But, as an African, it will be Afro girl, because our hair never grows down.
Yes.
It grows up and,
Out.
out.
Up, out, and kinky.
Absolutely. And helping these little girls see a lot of books with princesses and characters who look like them, who have matutas, who are wearing, the African earrings, and even body-wise, have an African physique. So that it is intentionally helping them celebrate and identify and resonate with who they are.
Right.
But then it's also intentionally adding patterns, so that, we all know how a story will be set in France if we see the Eiffel Tower. But that's because that's what we watch and that's what we consume.
Yes.
We'd know it's based in London or the US if we see the Statue of Liberty, or if we see the Big Ben or the London Bus. But we wouldn't know a story is based in Rwanda, because we don't know what are the iconic features in Rwanda or in Nigeria. Maybe South Africa, if we see Mandela somewhere, we may figure it out.
Yeah.
So changing that by making sure the style and the art communicates what does a Nairobi landscape look like. Because children read pictures, not words only.
Okay.
So when I'm writing a book, and that's how I started, I just wrote a book about an acacia tree, because I figured acacia trees are everywhere. Children learn A is for apple. But how old should a child be in Africa, in Kenya specifically, before they see an apple? Yet we have avocados, we have acacia tree. Imagine saying A is for avocado, and you run outside and pick the avocados and let's eat the avocados. That child will always remember A is for...
Thinking about it, Melissa, it's amazing. A for apple. And by the way, personally, I actually I ate an apple in my adulthood.
Yes.
So if I'm expecting my little kids to understand what's an apple, actually it's, and the kids that are growing up in the rural Kenya, they, some of them have never seen an apple. Actually. So that's really, I get it. I get the point.
Yes. So contextual learning.
Exactly.
And so when I wrote my first story about hibiscus flower, and it has the acacia tree, and I actually illustrated it myself. I sat and I, figured children are forgiving. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yes.
And so I drew and literally scanned onto a computer and sent it to a printer here downtown, and got my first book, physically.
Yes.
And then, walked around to bookshops and said, I have a story, how can I sell it? And went through a lot of rejection before, Textbook Center said, we'll pick 5. And I thought it was a mistake. I thought maybe they meant 500, but they said 5. And so they picked 5 books
to test them.
But God incidentally, I see it as a God incident, not a coincidence.
Yeah.
They were looking to grow their collection of African Kenyan writers. So a few months later, they called and said, okay, now we'll take Minnie and we'll make it a book of the month and see. And it became the top seller.
Wow.
And so then that caused me to see or deal with, where you have imposter syndrome.
Yes.
and wonder, am I really the best writer? Can I really write? And then I sat and now just started writing more and more stories, because
Absolutely.
I'm seeing the interaction, I'm seeing the need, but I'm also seeing the opportunity that we don't have enough. And those are, things that I'm willing to share with as many people who want to write a story, because I envision a day when we'll have a bookstore full of a collection of stories by Kenyan writers.
Absolutely.
And so it's in that space that I met this African music group, Sauti Sol, and they were looking to create content for children. And we wrote a few books, like the one with the key holder.
Yes.
So I can show them to you. So this is the first one about the hibiscus flower.
Yes.
As you can see, I just colored, scribbled, and this was, the one that became the bestseller.
All right.
And then that led me through the journey. So I now have 12 published books
Okay.
that are available everywhere. But then that's what led me to start this series on African fatherhood.
Okay.
And the idea behind this book, which goes with a music album called Father Studies,
Okay.
which when you buy the book, you can scan and it'll take you to the album.
Yes.
And the idea was, how do we celebrate African fatherhood
Okay.
and help an African dad know how to be present?
Okay.
And things you can do with your child: play a game, read a book, tickle your child, because we found a lot of dads know that their role is provide school fees, but how do you engage with your child?
And then send them very, very quickly back to their
To
mom.
yes, to
Because
their
I'm
mom.
reading a newspaper, you're troubling me. Go back to your mother.
Absolutely, absolutely. But let's read the newspaper together, for
Yes,
example.
yes.
Yes. So how do we have such conversations
Okay.
that equip fathers? And then that's what now led us to found Soul Kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so Soul Kids Africa is just a platform that creates content for children.
Okay.
And so we have this whole series of books, but we also have animation. Some are available online, and we're working on others. We have music, and this is, a collection of African lullabies in the different languages, but we make it fun for little children.
Okay.
And then we also have events. And how do we bring parents together to bond with their children through storytelling, through making something together, through holistically sound entertainment.
Okay.
Yes.
Absolutely. And that now is the other side of the extracurricular and providing those resources, because even creating events for where homeschooling parents can actually engage and bring their children and all that. And I attended the conference,
Yes.
the homeschooling conference, and I had a taste of that, and I was very, very impressed. It's a robust community, and you're doing a lot. And actually, homeschooled children get to play together. They get to sign up for all these games and all that. That's amazing. So these are resources that you can actually find in normal bookshops. And
Yes.
then let's talk about the upcoming Nairobi Book Fair. And then I had a recent guest where we were talking about converting these stories
Yes.
and putting the Kenyan Sign Language into it.
Yes.
Kitabu, I had the founder here
Yes.
on the Gigi report. You're part of that, and then he told me about the Nairobi Book Fair. So you can talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
because we are kind of like towards the end of
the
this
end.
conversation. Yeah.
Yes. So now that we have a whole repertoire of growing books, and part of my passion is to create leaders who are empowered and make the content accessible.
Yes.
So the acronym for Soul Kids is LEA, LEA, because tunalea watoto.
Yes.
And accessibility means access for all children, including those living with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I partnered with Ikitabu,
Mm-hmm.
where we have had the books translated into Braille, into sign language, and also there's a way that they can highlight it for children who have visual challenges, so they're visually impaired. Not
Okay.
completely blind, but they can see a bit.
Mm.
And so part of this collection we're bringing to the Nairobi International Book Fair, which will be next month, September.
Yes, September, yeah.
And we are availing all these resources together with Ikitabu just to make sure that they are affordable and accessible. And specifically for the listeners for Gigi Report, then we have a code that if anyone comes to the Nairobi International Book Fair and they say Gigi Report because they've engaged as an audience, then they get a discount for the books that they will purchase.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very amazing, ladies and gentlemen. Those of you that will come to the Nairobi book fair, Nairobi International Book Fair, you get a chance to get a discount on Melissa's books and other books that will be available during the book fair. And these guys are so generous. They are making me famous. They are saying when you go there and you mention the Gigi report, you get a discount. So
Absolutely.
make sure you note that somewhere and don't miss the Nairobi International Book Fair. I'm giving this promotion to them, you know, for free. And then again, I will of course ask them to make sure they mention the Elevate TV and the Gigi report so that then we all grow together.
Absolutely.
Wonderful, Melissa. So that's a good thing, promoting books and all that. Is there something else we are not talking about? Before we end this conversation, we have just about 2 minutes.
The significance of family as a unit.
Yes.
And not to overlook the role that parents play in shaping future destinies and future generations.
Okay.
And regardless of whatever academic choice a family makes, whether to send their child to school or to home educate them, God established the family unit as the atom of humanity. And that's where characters are formed, identity is birthed, purpose is shaped, spirituality in Christ is discovered and mentored. And I think just an encouragement for any parent who feels overwhelmed by this journey of parenting, of marriage. Just be encouraged that it is exhausting, it'll take a lot of you, it is demanding. But the statement I'd say is, if you don't know what you would die for, then you don't know what you're living for. And the place that you're irreplaceable is your family. Career, professions, all of those, there can be other authors, there can be other writers, but there can only be one mom to my children, and that's something worth all the sacrifice. But be encouraged that God provides every resource. He is an enabler, and that he who began that good work is faithful to complete it. And he provides every single resource exceedingly abundantly. And there's no one way, just follow him. He is the way, the truth, and the life.
Wonderful. That's a very good place to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Melissa, for coming on the show and sharing amazing insights and wisdom for those who are homeschooling, and also the whole space of homeschooling and the resources, wonderful resources that you've been able to put together. You're an amazing person, and we have every reason to celebrate you and to promote you and to thank you for sharing this wonderful information with us. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we had for you. This is the Gigi Report. We've come to the end of this today's show. I'm so glad that you stayed tuned in. Until next time, please keep it Elevate TV. Once again, we'll see you next week, same time, same channel. Keep it Elevate. God bless you. Have a good evening or day wherever you're watching from. God bless you. Bye.
Bye.